Kenneth Walker doubtful this week. Christian McCaffrey out this week. Tank Bigsby, Bucky Irving, way more involved than we thought they would be last week. So there's a lot of question marks at the running back position. We're running through every single matchup today. And the reason I do it on Saturdays is because it gives us time to get a good injury report and make some rankings changes. So make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers working on a Saturday. So this first matchup right here, I'm telling you right now, Jordan Mason for the San Francisco 49ers at the Minnesota Vikings, I am telling you to insert him into your lineup one way or the other 95% of the time. I think Jordan Mason is going to look very similar to what he did last week. Maybe not as efficient and maybe not as dominant, but it's a very similar matchup. The Minnesota Vikings have a above average defense, and I think the 49ers are going to roll over the Vikings this week. And the good thing is, with Kyle Shanahan's system, he wants to use a running back. He wants to use one running back. So that automatically ensures Jordan Mason holds a very good workload week to week without Christian McCaffrey there. So based on that offense and how well they're running right now, and based on how well I think this game is going to go for the 49ers, Jordan Mason, 95% of the time, needs to go into your lineup this week. I would play him over someone like J.K. Dobbins. I would play him over someone like Jerome Ford, Ramondre Stevenson, Alvin Kamara. I would play him over all those types of guys. Maybe not over someone like a Bijan Robinson, but he's probably in that same tier as like a Derrick Henry or an Isaiah Pacheco for me this week. Aaron Jones is flexible. I think this is a bad matchup for him. I was obviously wrong about him last week. I told you guys about that on the What I Got Right and Wrong video, but Aaron Jones is facing a tough 49ers matchup this week. It's not the same as taking on the Giants, man. It's going to be a lot tougher. He's going to be flexible because he will get work, but it's not an upside matchup that I want to play. Ty Chandler had opportunities last week. Ultimately, I don't think is going to be important enough on this Minnesota Vikings offense, and just not efficient enough. Last week, it probably won't change much this week in his favor. The Seattle Seahawks at the New England Patriots. I think that Zach Charbonnet, with this Kenneth Walker news, is going to be very, very high-end flex option guy. Now, I can recall last year when Kenneth Walker missed a couple games, Zach Charbonnet was disappointing as a running back one. And that's probably what we're looking at again here, is that he monopolizes most, if not all, of the running back touches this week against the Patriots, which, based on workload, definitely makes him a high-end flex option. Would I play him over the guys I was telling you about with Jordan Mason? I wouldn't play him over Alvin Kamara. I wouldn't play him over J.K. Dobbins. I would probably play him over Jerome Ford. That's probably what I'm looking at with Zach Charbonnet. So anybody above Jerome Ford is a toss-up for me until you get like a couple spots more, then I'm not playing Zach Charbonnet. And anybody below Jerome Ford, like a Ramondre Stevenson, I would play him over him. Ramondre Stevenson, as good as he was last week, I'm telling you guys, I know I'll get pushback for this. The Patriots are not a revelation. Ramondre Stevenson will handle the workload, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good volume. Now, last week it was. The Bengals defense sucks. The Seahawks defense, much, much different. So I think Ramondre has a little bit of a wake-up call this week. Probably not nearly as good in this game, and probably doesn't have a touchdown in this game. Antonio Gibson, you don't play him. You don't play him, there's no question about it, and you don't play anybody else in this matchup. The New York Giants at the Washington Commanders. Brian Robinson, I think, is a start-worthy player. I wouldn't say you have to start him no matter what, but I would say 75 to 85% of the time, I'm telling you to play Brian Robinson Jr. Brian Robinson's in a very similar tier to somebody like a J.K. Dobbins for me this week. The matchup is really good for him, and I do think that Brian Robinson Jr. is just a guy I kind of really like this year with Jane Daniels. Jane Daniels is going to make Brian Robinson Jr. really efficient this year because defenses can't stack the box and just count on Brian Robinson Jr. running the ball like last year. They have to be able to respect Jane Daniels' legs. That opens up everything for Brian Robinson. So I think Brian Robinson, more often than not this year, going to be a must-start territory type of guy. Singletary is more flexible than Eckler, but Eckler is flexible this week. Singletary, obviously just based on workload, doesn't look like Tyrone Tracy Jr. is going to be challenging him anytime soon for touches this week. Now, I think that this week, the matchup is better than last week, so I do think Devin Singletary is a relatively high-end flex option, but nobody I'm trying to play because I do think the receiving options are better than Devin Singletary on the Giants. And I think that Austin Eckler, was way more involved last week than I thought he would be, so I think he's flexible based on last week's opportunities, but I definitely prefer Brian Robinson Jr. in this offense, and you can't play Tyrone Tracy Jr. in this matchup. The next matchup here, the Los Angeles Chargers at the Carolina Panthers, and I think J.K. Dobbins is a smash start this week. You play J.K. Dobbins. I think that based on last week, if you just look at workload, obviously it was a basically 50-50 split between him and Gus Edwards. I think that based on what they both did with their opportunities, J.K. Dobbins becomes that guy and gets, if there's 30 rushing attempts, I think J.K. Dobbins gets 19 of them, and I think Gus Edwards gets 11 of them. That's how good J.K. was last week compared to Gus Edwards. So I think Gus Edwards is still a pretty decent flex option, probably in the same tier as like a Devin Singletary, because Gus Edwards is going up against the Carolina Panthers, which keeps him in there. And I don't think Gus Edwards is all of a sudden going to lose everything in this backfield. He'll still be involved, and the matchup is too fantastic. Chuba Hubbard makes me sad. Makes me really sad. I was a big Chuba guy before the start of the season. You can't play him over Gus. Definitely can't play him over JK. Based on, I think, the fact that he's going to be the running back one, I believe he will be. You can play him, but the matchup is not good. So I would say most times I would not start Chuba Hubbard. Miles Sanders, don't play him. I don't think that there's enough upside for both Carolina running backs, and I'm going with my gut saying that Chuba Hubbard is the running back one. The New Orleans Saints at the Dallas Cowboys this week. Alvin Kamara remains a must start in most situations, but a shaky one. This matchup is not the same as the Carolina Panthers, man. They're in Dallas this week taking on the Cowboys. It's not the same. It's not the same. He remains a must-start because of the targets that he's going to get, especially in this matchup, where they're going to have to check the ball down because Dallas's front seven will get after Derek Carr. It is going to look much different this week than it did last week. So I think Kamara is definitely still must-start because of that, but he's not going to see the same efficiency running the ball as he did in week one. Zeke is the better option out of Rico at this point. I was wrong about that one too. I thought Rico was going to take over running back one. I still don't rule out the possibility, which is why I don't think you should drop Rico Dowdle. Like, he's still involved last week, and he's just not very efficient. But that's really what it's all going to depend on. But at the end of the day, this week, Zeke is the better play because he was last week, and I don't think anything is going to change this week. But I think they're both flexible. Zeke is just in a better, higher tier than Rico Dowdle is. You can't be certain on either Cowboys running back, but you can be certain on CeeDee Lamb getting more than half a yard this week, which is what his line is on Underdog. So if you haven't taken advantage of this, you need to take advantage of it right now before it is over. Go down in the comments, use the link in the comments, and when you use code FFN to deposit $10 on Underdog, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, and you'll be able to take advantage of this free CeeDee Lamb line right here. So go down in the comments, use that link, and use code FFN to sign up for Underdog and take advantage of the CeeDee Lamb line. The Indianapolis Colts at the Green Bay Packers is our next matchup. Jonathan Taylor, you fire him up. Josh Jacobs, you fire him up. Jonathan Taylor, I think the matchup is great this week, and I think with Josh Jacobs, there is no doubt in my mind he could get 30 opportunities this week. He's going to be heavily used, and they may not all be great opportunities, but he's going to be used a ton in this offense. And I think the offense is good enough to figure out a way to get him in the end zone. So I would say Josh Jacobs is definitely must start this week. And I don't think that anybody else is playable. Trey Sermon is the backup for Indianapolis. He's not playable, and you can't play Marshawn Lloyd, even if he does play in his first game back from injury that's been like over a month at this point. The Cleveland Browns at the Jacksonville Jaguars is our next matchup here. And you do play Travis Etienne, but he's a lower end flex or starting option. I'm worried about Travis Etienne. If he splits the carries with Tank Bigsby again, it's going to be tough. Versus Cleveland this week, it's going to be much different than playing the Dolphins. So I think Etienne is still startable because he's going to get the reception work, but I do think that I'm worried about this matchup. And Jerome Ford is a higher-end flex option. Like I said, I would play Zach Charbonnet over him, but I would play Jerome Ford over somebody like a Zeke or over somebody like a Rico Dowdle because the matchup is pretty good this week against the Jags. Tank Bigsby, deep-end flex option. If you're in a 14, 16, 18-team league, Tank Bigsby can be played based on last week and the involvement that he had. Now, I think this matchup, again, is a lot tougher, so you can't exactly like put him in with confidence. But if you're facing down a decision where it's like you're looking at Miles Sanders or Ty Chandler, then you would go ahead and you play Tank Bigsby in that matchup. Deonta Foreman, you don't play him, and you don't play anybody else. The New York Jets at the Tennessee Titans is our next matchup here. Breece Hall, you obviously fire him up. No questions asked. Let's move on. Tony Pollard is the best play and a high-end flex option. The only reason, actually, Tony Pollard isn't in start territory is because I think the matchup is uniquely tough. And the reason I say uniquely tough is because the Jets are going to come in so mad. I mean, their defense got embarrassed last week. That was an embarrassment. And I think they're going to come in hair on fire. I think they're going to take it to the Titans this week. I think it'll be a relatively close matchup, but I think the Titans will struggle to get going offensively. So Tony Pollard, I think, is definitely a high-end flex option because he's clearly the running back one. But that doesn't mean that Tajay is not playable. I think Tajay is going to get continuously involved, especially in a pass-first game script. So I think Tajay definitely is a low-end flex option, but he's not a must-sit yet. But you do sit Braylon Allen, obviously. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Detroit Lions, you play all three of them. Jahmyr Gibbs, Rachaad White, David Montgomery. You do not sit any of them. The two Lions running backs most times are going to be both must-starts. And I still prefer Jahmyr Gibbs over Montgomery because Jahmyr Gibbs gets targets. And he has more upside to hit big plays than Montgomery does. Rachaad White, he's just, I'm worried for sure. I'm worried. I think that Rachaad White is definitely a guy that could cede more touches over the weeks if he continues to be inefficient. And I think that based on what we've seen from him, he's just not a very efficient guy. So he's a guy who may be trending down, but right now, I don't think Bucky Irving's taking it anytime soon. But Bucky Irving, very similar situation to Tank Bigsby. I think he's flexible in a deeper league. You don't play this guy in like a 12-team league unless you're really desperate and you've been ravaged with something. But I do think that Bucky Irving is definitely a guy that I think is flexible in deeper leagues. The Las Vegas Raiders at the Baltimore Ravens this week. Derrick Henry, you play him. You play Derrick Henry. This is a game script for Derrick Henry. They're going to beat the brakes off the Raiders. That is the highest spread of the entire week. I think Baltimore's favored by like 9. You can see it on the screen. I think it's like 9. Derrick Henry, this is a game for him. They're going to run out the clock. They're going to run the ball down the Raiders' throat. I think Derrick Henry will just have a really good game in this game. You could play Zamir White. He's the better option between him and Alexander Mattison. I believe he will be the running back one. In this matchup against Baltimore, it's not looking good. And chances are good, Zamir White probably never cracks must-start territory. Zamir White it's not looking good. Mattison, similar tier to Tank Bigsby and Bucky Irving, deep flex dart throw. That's basically what those two guys are. Justice Hill, you don't play him. Los Angeles Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Kyren Williams, James Conner, fire them up. You play both these guys. I think Kyren Williams, the concerns that people had in the offseason about Blake Corum, it's like what Travis Etienne was for Tank Bigsby last year. Like, Travis Etienne was so clear that a running back won last year. That's what we're looking at with Kyren. Ronnie Rivers was more of a threat than Blake Corum was last week. So, Kyren Williams must start against the Cardinals defense. Love the matchup. And then James Conner here, just a really good player. I think just continues to prove a lot of people wrong, including myself. I've struggled with Conner over the years, but I'm in on him. I'm totally in on Conner at this point. And then you really don't play anybody else. Nobody else is really relevant. Corum, obviously, you don't play him. Keep an eye on Trey Benson, but based on last week and based on how Conner looks, you don't play Trey Benson right now, that's for sure. The Cincinnati Bengals at the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Isaiah Pacheco is still a must-start. I only say still because there is some level of uncertainty, I think, with people on Pacheco. Because Samaje Perine, since he was signed to the Chiefs, got a couple targets in week 1. So it's like maybe he does take a little bit more over the next several weeks. I'm not there yet. I think Pacheco is still a pretty locked and loaded start because the matchup is great against the Bengals, and he still did handle the majority of everything in that backfield. So Pacheco, he's going to be fine. You do not sit Pacheco against the Bengals defense. I think Zach Moss is a high-end flex play, though. I think Zach Moss and the Bengals, as I said on the wide receivers video, there's a chance that the Bengals could snap out of their funk that they always face in the early part of the season against the Kansas City Chiefs because they just need to get up and play for them. Because I honestly do think if the Bengals lose by a beatdown, there's going to be people on the hot seat in Cincinnati. I think they're going to get up to play for this game. And Zach Moss, based on last week, is the most involved guy. Now, Chase Brown, it's a similar situation to Tajay, except I actually like Chase Brown better because I think Chase Brown will be involved on more reception work. And I think that this matchup against the Chiefs could be a Chase Brown type of game. So, mid-end flex option, I think, better play than Tajay Spears this week, but don't play him over Zach Moss. And then Samaje Perine, keep an eye on him, I guess, and maybe have him as a handcuff to Pacheco, but don't play Samaje Perine, that's for sure. The Steelers at the Broncos. They're all flexible, but I don't have much confidence in any of them. The guy I like the most is Najee. Najee has the most secure workload. He is taking on a tough defense in Denver. I don't love the matchup. So I don't think that this Najee situation is great, but he's the best of the bunch to me. Javonte, I believe, is the better play. Based on last week, you might say Jaleel McLaughlin. I can understand it. But Jaleel McLaughlin fumbled the ball last week. And I said this a bunch this week. Sean Payton is an old school guy. He hates fumbles. He hates turnovers. So I think that Jaleel McLaughlin, there's a decent chance he's in the doghouse this week. Now, I'm not going to tell you to bench him because he could lead the team in work again. But I think Javonte Williams, my hunch is he leads the backfield, which is why I play him over Jaleel. And Jaylen Warren is not a must bench. He's a lower-end flex option. I think last week probably had a lot to do with the fact that he was still recovering from the hamstring injury before the season. But based on involvement last week, I think that Najee seems to fit better in Arthur Smith's system. So a little bit worrisome, but I do think Warren will probably, if anything, get involved on more reception work. And obviously, nobody's must start. Like, nobody's must start. You can flex all of them. They're all shaky flex plays, though. The Chicago Bears at the Houston Texans on Sunday night. Mixon, fire him up. I mean, I was so wrong about Mixon last week. I'm back in on him. No reason to say anything more. Swift is a mid-tier flex option, man. I mean, Swift's his freaking debut was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. So I think that Swift is really hard to trust. Against the Texans on Sunday night in Houston, I don't trust him. I would say you can flex him over somebody like a Tajay Spears, over somebody like a Chase Brown, but I'm really worried about Swift. And then obviously you don't play Pierce and you don't play Khalil Herbert because nobody really in the running back room looks to have much upside in that Chicago Bears team. The Atlanta Falcons at the Philadelphia Eagles this week, the Monday night matchup. Saquon, Bijan, fire him up. No reason to talk. The only thing I'll say about Bijan is the offense runs through him. Bijan's going to have better games than last week. This could be it. It might not be, but you do not sit Bijan Robinson. You do not even consider it. Bijan is must start. And then you don't play anybody else in this matchup. So let me know how your team looks this week. And if you want to see the top 30 running backs and where all these guys rank this week, click on this video right here.